Hello and welcome to this online tutorial. To help me, I'll be using this set of notes, which can be freely downloaded from www.flippinghistory.net. I hope if you enjoy this tutorial that you'll be able to subscribe using the watermark below. Okay, let's get started. Why did William win the Battle of Hastings? 9 AM on the 14th of October 1066 is one of the most famous times and dates in British history. It's when a Frenchman, William the Duke of Normandy, started the battle which defeated the English King Harold Godwinson, who had been the Earl of Wessex. William then became known to history as William the Conqueror and began a period of history known as the Middle Ages from about 1066 to 1485. With him came new buildings like castles and cathedrals, new laws and regulations like the Harrying of the North and the Domesday Book, and new cultural changes like new first names like Henry and Terry, new words like herbs instead of warts, and new concepts such as feudalism. British history would have been very different had William lost. For these reasons, therefore, it is crucial to ask ourselves why he won this battle. Now, the English king, Edward the Confessor, who had one eyebrow higher than the other, little known fact, had died in January 1066, with no children or heirs. This then brought about a situation where a number of people believed they should claim the throne and succeed Edward. These included the Englishman Harold Godwinson, who crowned himself. It also included William Duke of Normandy, who believed he had been promised the throne by Edward in 1051. Also it included the Norwegian Harald Hardrada, whose ancestor Canute had once ruled England. In April 1066, a comet, now called Halley's Comet, passed through English skies. This happens only once in about 75 or 76 years, and many at the time believed this to be an omen or a sign of a change coming. Hardrada and Harold's own brother Tostig landed in the north of England and claimed a victory when their army of 15,000 at a place called Fulford in Yorkshire on the 20th of September. They even occupied York, the biggest city in the north. 5 days later though, Harold's army met them at Stamford Bridge, not the football ground, and Hardrada and his men were defeated. One soldier during the battle held off hundreds of foes allegedly on a wooden bridge until he was stabbed by a soldier below who had swam underneath him. But it was a big win for Harold, who'd caught Hardrada's men off guard and without armour. And in fact, only 24 of the 300 invasion ships managed to sail back home. So it appeared the new English king, Harold, had staved off his foreign threat. However, William got lucky. The wind changed direction, and so by the 28th of September, William now landed his army at Pevensey in the south coast of England. Harold Godwinson's victorious but exhausted troops now had to march down south to meet William. And so the French and English armies met at a place which is now called Battle. It is 7 miles northwest of Hastings in East Sussex in the south of England. William had about 10,000 soldiers, we think, and Harold had about 7,000. Most of the English were infantry or foot soldiers. The Ferd were mostly farmers, but he also had a royal guard known as housecarls, who had much better armour and two-sided Danish battle axes which could even cut a horse in half. Whereas about half of the French were archers or cavalry. It is reported that a French minstrel called Taillefer requested the honour of starting the battle. First he sang a song and juggled his sword as the English soldiers chanted "Ut, ut, ut," or "out, out, out" to the foreign invaders. Taillefer then killed one Englishman in the middle of the battleground before he charged into the English shield wall on his own and was cut to ribbons. The battle had now started, and the battle to change history had begun. By dusk, though, Harold was dead. Some believe he was shot by an arrow in the eye, others believe he was hacked down. But William had won, and some of the French soldiers allegedly feasted on the bodies of those lying dead on the battlefield. That would have been about 6,000 dead bodies. And on Christmas Day, 1066, William was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey. England therefore had experienced 3 kings in a single year: Edward the Confessor, Harold Godwinson, and William the Duke of Normandy. There are a whole range of reasons that the battle turned out the way it did. Today, we'll be reviewing some of the evidence to provide a factor-led explanation to the question, why did William win? So, to start off, we'll consider some of the problems with Harold Godwinson's army. And the first of these is that the majority of his men were ferd or farmers. They wouldn't have had much real training in combat, and they often lacked in armour compared to the Norman troops. Also, though, Harold had marched 200 miles south at a super speed to meet William. His soldiers had covered about 27 miles per day, and combined with the effects of fighting Hardrada, Harold's men were just really exhausted. Harold then had lost many of his best soldiers fighting Harold Hardrada at Stamford Bridge. Also, though, Harold could have waited before meeting William to give his men more time to recover and to regroup. His brother even advised him to, but Harold didn't act on this advice because William's Normans were harassing local people in the south, and so Harold felt he had to rush south. Another possible error we could point out is that there was a short break in the battle, where each side recovered the bodies of some of their dead. They may even have had some snacks, a bit like a tea break in a game of cricket. Both William and Harold failed to take advantage of this. Might history have turned out differently if they had? So our first point in explaining the battle is that Harold did make some mistakes. Also, though, we need to consider the role of luck. William was certainly lucky in some respects. He needed wind for his ships to sail, and the right conditions arrived at just the right moment when Harold was fighting Harold Hardrada in the north. Some people think the Normans' retreat wasn't a trick after all. Instead, they argue one group, the Bretons on the left, collapsed temporarily, and this caused the Saxons to leave their highland on Senlac Hill and chase them. If so, though, this was a very lucky break for William, because they didn't have to come down and chase them, and had they stayed on top of the hill and maintained their shield wall, by nightfall they probably would have won the battle. Another stroke of luck, possibly, for William was that King Harold was killed in the battle, and we think maybe by an arrow through his eye. This led the English to be leaderless, and although a small band of his loyal soldiers surrounded him and fought to their deaths, ultimately Harold's death was a stroke of luck for William. It is rumoured that Harold's mother later offered William the weight of her son's body in gold in return for his remains, but this was refused. Whatever, it is clear that his death ruined the fighting spirit of many of his men, and his body was so badly mutilated that his wife, Edith Swanneck, was the only person who could identify him through marks on his body that only she would know. Early French efforts to break the English shield wall were unsuccessful. They needed to do this by nightfall to stand a chance of winning, because they had less supplies than the English, who were on home soil. And lastly, as mentioned earlier, in April, Halley's Comet had been seen over England. People at this time were very superstitious, and many thought that this act was a sign that change would come and that William would win. Thirdly, though, we have to accept William's strengths as a leader. The Bayeux Tapestry shows William making a speech. Good orators throughout history tend to inspire people, and this piece of evidence suggests William had this skill. Also though, when the 31-year-old William landed at Pevensey Beach, it's reported that he slipped over and fell on the beach. This might have been considered a sign of the gods that he was about to fall on British soil. However, he stood up and made a joke saying, "I have taken England with both my hands." Also then, though, his soldiers were very well skilled and well equipped. The French had chainmail armour known as hauberks. These were knee-length and allowed for greater flexibility than old-fashioned plate armour. Moreover, William's horsemen or cavalry were faster than soldiers on foot, and they were much more manoeuvrable. They were armed with kite-shaped shields and lances. Many had double-edged swords, but some preferred maces. The horses themselves were armoured and were trained to headbutt with long metal spikes on their heads. These cavalry soldiers would train together in groups of about 10, known as a conroy, and would often know exactly what each other would do, and they worked as a great team. Also, a rumour broke out that William was dead, and some French soldiers may have panicked at this news. William then lifted up his helmet and rode amongst his men, yelling out that he was still alive. This was an example of how his leadership skills helped change the battle. William was described as a very strong person. He could draw bows that others couldn't, and he had a very deep voice. It's believed he was about 5'10" tall, which was very tall indeed for the time, so even his physical appearance would have kind of inspired his men. Moreover, William had landed with 776 ships. His flagship, which led the way, was called Mora. It's reported that when he arrived, he had these ships burnt in Pevensey, so that his soldiers knew in the event of a battle there was to be no retreat. This had to be a fight to the death. During the battle, William had already secured the support of the Pope, Alexander III, and so again his men believed they were fighting with God on their side. It was reported that 3 horses under William were killed in the battle, but he still fought on. William was previously called William the Bastard because his parents were unmarried. As he grew older, he became an expert in battle and was so ruthless that he once fought against his father, Robert the Magnificent. On another occasion, he chopped off the hands and feet of some rebels. William was clearly ruthless, and that was what was expected of a medieval leader. Our final piece of evidence, and possibly one of the most compelling, is that many believe William had ordered a pretend retreat and that it wasn't luck at all, and that he did this twice. This caused the English to chase them down and lose their high ground, their big advantage at the top of Senlac Hill. Because of where they feature in the Bayeux Tapestry, some believe it was Harold's brothers, Grith and Leofwine, who led the charge. So, to conclude, 1066 was clearly a key turning point in British history. William won the Battle of Hastings, partly due to luck, partly due to Harold's mistakes, and also partly due to his own skill. Okay, thanks for watching. If you'd like to know more about this topic, you can download a fully resourced free 4-part lesson from www.flippinghistory.net.